Greetings, welcome again to Let the Bible Helps You with Wiseman, and today we'll be covering an overview on the Gospel of Luke. Of course, the Gospel of Luke, it was written by Dr. Luke himself, who wrote two books in the Bible. He wrote the Gospel of Luke, and he also wrote the book of Acts. He's the only Gentile writer in the entire Bible. In the midst of 66 books, he's the only writer who is the Gentile. So, of course, we know Luke as a companion of Apostle Paul, because we see him in the book of Acts mentioning himself in a third person, and we see Apostle Paul in his epistles, like the epistle of Timothy and all of his Timothy on some of his epistle, calling Luke his physician. So, of course, Luke, who was a physician, he was more into doctor stuff, a medical doctor, if you may say. And we see that by the way he give an unique focus on the miracles, especially on the healing of Jesus Christ. He's the only gospel writer that provide an extensive background on most of the events that took place in the Bible, and they kind of provide us with historical context of most of the happenings, like the birth of John the Baptist. And okay, his theme, more than any other thing, the main theme of Luke in this gospel, it is Christ's compassion towards outcast. Christ's compassion, especially towards Gentile and as towards Samaritans and women and children. But more than anything, his focus is more into outcasts such as Gentiles and Samaritans. Luke, he was the only Gentile writer, and of course, he is writing although he is writing to broad audience of Gentiles, but first chapter makes it clear that his primary um reader was great Theophilus, he who was the Gentile. Luke's compassion towards Gentiles, we can say, develops because he was the companion of the apostles to the Gentiles. He was Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. Therefore, Luke's compassion grew more and more towards Gentiles, for Gentiles to be saved. So in his gospel, he focuses more on Christ's compassion towards Gentiles and towards the outcast, like those who were regarded as sinners of them all, like tax collectors and all that. Luke is the only writer that mentions, for example, tax collectors only when he mentions something good about them. There is nowhere where he mentions tax collectors and talks something bad. For example, in Luke chapter 3, verse 12, it says, "And some tax collectors also came to be baptized, and they said to him, 'Teacher, what shall we do?'" He mentioned tax collectors only when there is something good they are doing. Meaning, he provide hope to the outcast. He provide hope that Christ's mercy and compassion and grace has been extended to beyond Jews, beyond Israelites. It has been extended even to the outcast, even to the most spiritually bankrupt. It has been extended to Samaritans, to Gentiles, to the worst sinners of them all. Another example, we see it in Luke chapter 5, verse 27. It says, "After that, he went out and noticed the tax collector named Levi sitting in the text booth. And he said to him, 'Follow me.'" So here he mentions the calling of Matthew as a tax collector, that Christ's compassion towards the most man who was regarded as the worst sinner, Christ's compassion was extended even to him. Another example, we see it in Luke 7, verse 29. It says, "When all the people and tax collectors heard this, they acknowledged God's justice, having been baptized with the baptism of John." He also mentioned tax collectors. So how regarding the good thing that they have done, how they have acknowledged God and how they have been baptized and all. Another example, we see it in the Lordship, where it says, chapter 15, verse 1, it says, "Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to him to listen to him." Also, he also mentions tax collectors in a positive sense again. That is the primary central theme of the Gospel of Luke. God's mercy and compassion is extended beyond Israelites. Another example where he mentioned tax collectors is in chapter 18, verse 10 to verse 12, where when he talks, Christ talks about the two men went up into the temple to pray, and a Pharisee and a tax collector. We know all that. So a Pharisee and a tax collector went to the temple to pray, and a Pharisee prayed a very self-righteous prayer that didn't justify him, and tax collector the tax collector acknowledged his utterly spiritually bankruptcy, and he knew he was a sinner, and Christ said this one was the one who went home justified. So again, Luke mentioned tax collectors in a positive sense. The last one, it is Luke chapter 19 verse 2, where it says, there was a man called Zachariah, who was a chief collector, and he was rich. And Zachariah, verse 3, Zachariah was trying to see who Jesus was, and was unable because of the crowd. Here it shows us again, he mentions Zachariah, who was the most sinner of tax collectors, trying to see Jesus, and of course Jesus visited him, and the salvation was brought to him because he repented and returned all the money fourfold of the people whom he have cheated. That's it, guys. The overview of the Gospel of Luke. That is the primary message of Luke. Thank you so much. Until we meet next time.